All right, guys, welcome to Mind of a Genius. I am super excited today because we're going to be talking about something very, very important and dear to me, which is dealing with grief and trauma, as well as mental health. I think it's very important that we have these conversations because it impacts us every single day. And I have no other than the grief expert or mental health expert, I would say, slash genius here. Roxanne, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for opening up this space. I come here and I represent not only myself, but a tribe of individuals that have given me the privilege of sitting in a space much like the one you're giving me today. So Thank you. And definitely the word expert is one that I think that forever learners don't like that word.
Yeah, right.
I receive
All
it with
humble.
grace, but at the same time, it's one of those things that the more you learn about it, the more that you simply have passion and purpose for it as well.
Yeah, amazing. All right, so before we start, this is Truth or Post Game.
Okay.
This is a series of cards. I didn't tell you what they are, but these, you're going to choose just one card, just
Okay.
random questions. Nothing crazy, I promise. And you just answer whatever question you get. So you just have to pick one of these cards for this little game for us.
Okay, so we're going to talk about trauma in a little bit, right?
Yes, we will, I promise.
Okay. Y'all may not see it, but my hands are shaking. If you could speak any language, what would it be and why? Gosh. I think French. In school, I took French, but of course, I was never fluent in it.
Yeah.
But I hear those that are fluent in it, and I am always mesmerized
Oui,
by
yeah.
the romanticism in it.
Yes. French has this feel to it.
Yes.
I actually also studied French because obviously I'm from Ghana and we're surrounded by French countries.
Okay.
All three countries are French countries. And I never liked French because my teachers were absolutely terrible.
Oh.
Not terrible as in they didn't know what they were teaching, but they were just harsh on us.
Okay.
And that just, took me away from wanting to learn it at all. But, I think sometimes I can understand a few words.
Okay.
But yes, you should get on Duolingo. Yeah.
I've heard of it.
Yes,
Definitely.
yes, absolutely.
Something to consider for the new year.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. All right, Roxanne. I want to dive right into it.
Okay.
And I know that this is going to be much more of a deep conversation about a lot of different things. I know right now you really, really dive into being a therapist and helping people with grief. But what inspired you to be a therapist in the first place?
So this is definitely something that I didn't, I wanted to be an astronaut when I was
Oh,
a
wow.
child, right? So definitely being a grief therapist was not in the cards for me. I did go through losing one of my own daughters, and that really took me down a very dark path for a couple of years. And after I went through enough of the anger and enough of, trying to make sense of questions I was never going to have any responses for, I finally said, you know what, if the pain doesn't leave me, I have to get up and I have to leave the pain.
Yeah.
And at that point, I really started to look into what can I do with this. It was so much that I was carrying, and at the same time, it was so much that I needed to release. And I didn't know how to do that, but I went to seek guidance at school, and they said, you know what, maybe this is a path for you, and I'm thankful for that guidance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you shared that with me. What was that experience like, losing a daughter? That's someone that you hold so dear to. And I can imagine that you had a certain feeling to it. Like, what was that experience like? And how did that make you feel?
The experience in and of itself is really like losing a part of your identity that you never recover. Going through it with her, and I was pregnant when I was told that, likely she was going to have severe cardiac malformations. And I was actually given the option of aborting her in my pregnancy because of her condition. And I remember looking at my mom, and she said, no, the way that she comes, we'll receive her.
Wow.
There was so much prayer that was placed into motion, and I think that was me bargaining ahead of time. Like, if she's healthy, I'm going to do this. And then when she's born and she's not healthy, at that point, I think that my anger really did start. Seeing her go through the process of pain got me to a place where I finally surrendered and I said, you know what? Enough of seeing that one little being that, at that point she was 4 months old. But enough of it. And I made the choice along with my family to say, you know what? It's time to let her go.
Yeah.
It was a very, it's kind of one of those things that you make a mental note of it and you reflect back on it and you ask yourself, did it really happen? And for me, it wasn't really consolidated until a couple months later when I received a box with, her handprint and footprint and her lock of her hair and some pictures that they had taken that I didn't remember them being taken. And as a matter of fact, in the TEDx, those pictures, I share them with the world for the very first time. I had held them very sacred to myself because that was something that was very, very personal to me. But seeing those pictures really reminded me that that story did happen and that she did come into this world for a purpose that was lived in 4 months. But it was a baton that was passed on to me to say, okay, now go and do something with it. And how did it feel? I don't think that there's one specific feeling.
Yeah.
I think that when you go through that complicated trauma and grief process, because it was both, I think that there's a point where you just numb yourself out so that you don't feel. And that's just the way, the brain's way of helping you to survive through something that otherwise you would have not been able to.
Yeah.
But once those emotions start to thaw out, then it's like a tsunami that comes over you and it makes you feel at times that you're drowning in it,
Yeah.
So I think that to this day, it's, waves of calmness and stillness where I can reflect and I can have, so much peace over it. And then there's other days where it's just like a reminder of what I wish would have never happened. And every part of me would wish that I would have that 21-year-old that I'd be celebrating right now.
Yeah.
But that's just not the way that it happened.
Yeah. And I appreciate you for sharing that. And we call ourselves TED sisters, brother. She is my TED sister because I heard you share that story on the stage. Mm-hmm. And for someone who, I tell people I don't remember the last time I cried. But for someone that it really hit me to a core because you talked about something very just simple but very transformational to where how do we deal with grief in a way that, people deal with grief differently.
Yeah.
And what is the right way to deal with grief? And I think that's a question that I've always had is there a right way to deal with grief?
For that person, there is. For the person that is in the storm in the moment, whatever way they need to deal with it is the right way for them. And I think that the problem that many times we have is that we want it to be our way. We want to bring the words that we feel are going to be comfort. And when there's dismissiveness or when they don't reciprocate or they don't say the thank you or whatever it may be, we take it personal and we go right back and push away rather than lean into it, right? Yeah. So yes, there is a right way so long as you're the one that's in that space and you're the one that gets to determine what that is. Because in that moment, there's so many things that are already out of your control.
Yeah.
That many times you having the opportunity to decide what the right way is for you is the only thing that keeps you actually hanging on to something.
Wow. And that's really deep because then the question becomes, is there a right thing to say to someone who is going through grief? Like, what can I say to someone who is experiencing grief to make them feel some sort of relief? Is there even any sort of relief for someone who is going through grief in the first place?
So I believe that there is, and as a matter of fact, that's where I say that this is a foreign language to people that haven't experienced it. When you haven't experienced the pain of grief, many times you feel that words are going to bring comfort. And I'll give you an example. When we experienced it, when my family and I experienced the death of my daughter, there was many people that approached and that said, God knows what he's doing. And those words, because I was already in a space where I was angry, that in my mind I was like, okay, God, if you love me, why would I be hurting this way? How can this in any way be love, right? It shouldn't hurt this much. Other people that said he needed an angel. And in my mind, once again, it's kind of like putting more lemon on the wound, where I thought to myself, well, why would he choose mine? Like, why didn't mine meet that requirement? What about her? What about me? Other people who said, well, at least you still have 2 other children, as if in any way the presence of that third one was invalidated simply because there was 2 other ones, or the ones that say, well, you can always have another one. And I understand that it came from a place of discomfort in them, because they didn't know what to say to make me feel in any way comforted by their presence.
Yeah.
And here, what I encourage people, especially those that don't know what to say, don't feel the need to say anything at all. Many times you won't remember what people said to you unless it was hurtful. But you will remember the people that simply stood in the silence with you. But we as humans don't like silence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We see somebody silent and we want to get them to open up. We want to fix the problem. And grief is not a problem to be fixed. It's something to be witnessed.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible. There's a lot of people who, yes, they want to say certain things to make someone feel good, and they may end up saying the wrong things. And so, would you say that? I mean, if I don't know the experience someone is having with, let's say, whatever I say, then it's the right thing to do to be silent and support them in that experience, or there is a right thing to say at all?
So in my view, and from what I have experienced, it's simply saying something as simple as, I'm here for you, or I'm here with you, or what can I do to be present for you? Once again, here, you validate the fact that they don't have to provide a response. But if they do choose, it's something that they are making a choice. If they say, you know what, just take a seat here with me, or just hold me, then that's where you meet them where, once again, we meet them where they're at, rather than expecting for them to meet us where we're comfortable.
Yeah.
Right? It's not about our comfort at that point.
I like it. So you make it about them, not
Absolutely.
about you. It shouldn't even be about you
It
in the
shouldn't,
first
yeah.
place. Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that, because these are things like personally, it's hard when someone goes through loss in finding the right words to say to make them feel good. But I guess it's not in my place to make them feel good. It's my place to just be there for them. And I think that's maybe a takeaway for me and for a lot of people. And so then, Roxanne, in your line of work, what does transformation look like? What does it look like for you to say you're successful with a specific client when it comes to going through grief or trauma? Because, I mean, I reckon there's multiple ways you can measure success, but what does that look like for you?
So here, at least the way that I've helped myself to cope through, whether it be failure or success in treatment, it's understanding that there's no such thing as a failure. Because people will heal up to the capacity that they're ready for it. And sometimes they will show up and they will discontinue their own treatment. And that does not mean that I was not successful. It just means they were not ready for it.
Yeah.
For those that allow me to witness their pain and that give me the opportunity to see them in a healed version while they reach what I'm seeing, which is what we know as post-traumatic growth, right? It's being able to go through that process, but not just go through it, but grow through it. And oftentimes what I see is that as you start to validate, as you start to help them to make sense of it, what happens is that they start to transform the way that they create significance with their loved one. And they get to a place where they're able to accept that although physically they're no longer here, emotionally, spiritually, supernaturally, I now get to see them or meet them in a different realm. And it's them really transforming the way they see the love that they have for their loved one. Because just because the loved one has gone doesn't mean they stopped loving, right? So it's just learning to love in a different way and move forward through a different significance in that relationship. When they get to that space, that's when I see that there's a change, there's a shift. That's where I tell them, you initially come to me and you're in your fall and your winter season, where you see the trees and they're barren, and you see outside and it's gloomy and it's cold and it feels lonely. But then your spring starts to come around where there's new hope for new things, right? And in that, it's also the feeling once again, right? It's them learning to adapt to this new life and saying, you know what? In that space, that loved one continues with me. It's just through a different way.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So kind of fast forward into it. I'm sure there's a lot of misconceptions about grief that you experience in your line of work. What are some of those misconceptions?
That time heals all wounds.
Wow. Time doesn't?
No. As a matter of fact, I've seen, and here I want to be, extremely validating of the fact that grief is not simply, and I'm saying simply in a very minimalistic way, it's not only the loss of a loved one. Because as a matter of fact, people that have gone through divorce, they're grieving somebody who continues to be alive, and now they've gone and they have a new life with someone else, and that wound hurts in a different capacity, but it hurts also to their own level. There's people that they have an accident or something happens and they're no longer the person they used to be. And they have to grieve that old self. There's children who experience a divorce of their parents, and there's a lot that they grieve as well. So this is a very, very normalized term when I look at it through my lens. But out in the world, it's something that's often so much shame and secrecy to, right? Like, just don't talk about it, as if not talking about it is going to solve the pain. So when I go back to time heals all wounds, I have had clients who have been carrying the same pain for 20, 30 years, still feeling the same magnitude of the sadness, the anger, the rage, whatever that may look like for them. But because they haven't processed, they're holding it as if it just happened, right? So I tell my clients, you have to feel in order to heal. The problem is that we run away from the feeling and we never get to the healing, right? So that's one of the biggest misconceptions that I have. And I think that that's one of the most dangerous ones, because we place ourselves in this space where we think that if I just let it go longer, if I just let it go another year, it's going to be better next year. And then you find yourself simply in that same exact space. As a matter of fact, for the clients that have not allowed themselves to process, they will find that scents, dates, the way that the air feels on a certain day, it can quickly trigger you right back into that same space as if no time has passed at all.
Yeah.
And that really re-traumatizes the person. So I think that those are some of the things that definitely we need to be aware of.
And I asked about this because that's a misconception that had, about
Okay.
time heals everything. Time heals all. And so personally for me, like dealing with grief has been something that's been very passive.
Okay.
Of like, okay, like, let me not talk about it. Because if I don't talk about it, then
It didn't
everything's gonna be
happen.
fine. It ain't happen. And so, and I know that there's a lot more people like that. A lot more people going through grief, or a loss of a loved one, or a loss of a relationship, or a divorce, or something that they're not wanting to either talk about or even think about, even after this whole process. But yes, as you said, there's certain things that causes those traumatic memories to come back and say, oh, you listen to the song and all of a sudden
Oh,
you
yeah.
remember something. How should those people deal with some of those trauma, or how should they deal with it in the first place at all?
Okay. So I think this is a really, really important question. and let me see if I can conceptualize it correctly. Trauma or grief is one of those things that it's like a pendulum. The harder we push, the harder it comes back. And if you push it hard enough, it's going to knock you out when it returns, right? So this is one of those areas in which giving yourself permission to feel is quite possibly one of the most important things that you can do for yourself. Because keeping yourself busy, distracting yourself, which is what many of us do, right? We keep ourselves busy, this task, that task, the other, because we don't want to get to a space where we think about it. But then come bedtime, that pendulum comes right back to knock on our door and say, hey, I'm still here.
Yep.
You're not acknowledging me. So that's where we find that individuals will have intrusive thoughts or memories, nightmares if it was something that was traumatic, or you just find yourself fighting your way to sleep because you cannot get yourself to a peaceful state, right?
Yeah.
Memories have a way, unprocessed memories have a way to come and visit us when we're in stillness. So if you do not allow yourself a space throughout the day to simply be in stillness and allow this to come your way without you running away from it, you will find yourself with a decreased quality of life or health because it starts to impact everything about you.
Wow.
So I tell my clients, do it for the health of it, and do it because trauma or grief are going to add at least 10 years to your life. You'll see people that they're 30, 40 years old, and you look at them and you're like, man, they look like they're 50, 60. And then you'll see others that are 80 and they look like they're 60 years old.
Yeah.
What's the difference? The difference is that emotions are literally, our body is simply a reflection of what we have worked and processed, and we are healed, or what we are running away from, and therefore our body is literally keeping the score for us.
Wow. I mean, I'm, and I think it's important that I ask this question even just personally for
Okay.
me, on again dealing with that trauma, because sometimes it's I think it's more than the feeling of, do I actually even feel it in the first place? Like, do I allow myself to feel it?
Okay.
And after that whole process, it's like, yes, keeping yourself busy or keeping myself busy to not even think about it. But yes, you're right. Once you're still, once you're, in your bed, doing nothing, it just hits you right back.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to face it at some point. So I'm glad you talk about that. But I'm sure that when you interact with clients, you share a little bit of your story or you relate to them in some way. How does that affect the way that they respond to the conversations you have when they come to you with grief or trauma issues?
How does it impact? I'll give you an example, and this is something that I shared in the TEDx. When I first had my opportunity to figure out how my story made sense, it was actually because I was able to meet a mom in that space. So I had walked into this room, pediatric oncology room, and there was a young girl, and you know, I had so much guilt because at the end of the day, I could run home and those kids didn't have that same opportunity, right? So when it finally dawned on me, hey, they don't get that chance. I get that chance. They don't. I decided to come in and say, you know, what is it that I can do for you today to make your life better? It became a mantra for my life. I walked into that room and I spoke those simple words to that one young girl. And typically the kids would tell me, you know, can you order me some pizza or a hamburger, something that I tangibly could do. And this young girl tells me, can you talk to my mom? And I kind of put on my brakes right away and I was like, sure, about what? And she says, I'm ready to go home. And that morning I did, you know, you do discharge planning in the morning for any clients that are going to be released or discharged. And I didn't remember anything in her particular chart. So my mind is just kind of going 1,000 an hour. And she looks at me and she tells me, she's like, no, I'm ready to go home. And in that moment, I understood that she was not talking about her physical house. She was talking about her spiritual house. And she tells me that there was angels in that room and that they were waiting for her to go. And I kind of just looked around the room and I was like, here? And I literally to this day, I still get chills because it was just such a profound presence in that space. And she tells me, yes, there's one at each side of my headboard and there's one at my feet. But my mom comes in here and she tells me that she needs me and she cannot live without me and I cannot leave her like this. It was a pivotal moment in my own life. That little girl will never know the impact that she made by tasking me with something that I was running away from. Yeah. So I go outside, I look in the lobby, and there's this mom. And research shows that every 10 minutes a parent loses a child. And I knew that in that moment, you know, she was about to become that statistic. So I approach her and I said, you know, your daughter needs you. And she looks at me and she's like, I've been here with her every day, day in and day out. She was tired, exhausted. And I said, yes, but today she needs something different from you. Today she needs for you to tell her the biggest lie of your life. You're going to go in there. You're going to be super strong. You're not going to cry in front of her. Huge ask for a parent, right? Huge ask from me to that parent. And I said, what she needs to hear from you is that it's okay for her to go. And the level of anger that I saw in her face at that moment, it scared me because I knew exactly where she was because I had been there a couple of years before. But she told me, how dare you ask me to let go of my daughter? Have you ever lost a child? And that light bulb in my head said, yes, I have lost a child. And in that moment, she trusted. And that's what it is in grief. There has to be trust that you're not speaking just from your teeth out. You're speaking from your heart. Yeah. And they can sense it. And that makes them feel safe despite the pain. So when I said yes to her, I remember that I told her, you're going to go in there. And if you come back out and your knees hit the ground, because I remember that's exactly what happened with me. I said, my knees will hit the ground with you. Wow. And she went in there and she came back out and she was distraught. But shortly after, her daughter passed away. Wow. And in that moment, I understood that that little girl was simply holding on because she knew that in that moment, she had to protect mom. And that really was transformational. And when I'm talking to the client that's across from me, and I say things that although I may not share the whole extent of my own story, because it's not about me, it's about them, they are able to hear something that resonates with, she gets me. Yeah. right?
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what you want. What you want is to create a space that is so safe that without you saying much, you speak everything that they cannot externalize.
Wow. So and I mean I can't imagine having to give that news to a family or to a mom. But like you said, like you've and it's crazy how you didn't go ahead and tell her that,
No.
hey, I've been through this before. She posed a question to you, and you simply just responded to her. And I think, yes, like you said, that trust probably made her listen to you a little bit more. But for example, for a mom like that, or for someone who has just experienced loss immediately, what can they do to even begin a healing process? And do they even need to begin a healing process in a specific timeline, or like what does that look like?
So for each individual, it's going to be different. Normal grief is typically processed in a time span of about a year. That's
Okay.
normal grief, right?
Okay.
So initially, when they're in the process of bereavement, the expectation is not that in that moment they need to go see a therapist, because the brain will do what the brain knows how to do. We have such an amazing brain that just naturally goes through its own process if we allow it, if we're not pushing, right? You need to, you need to, you need to.
Yeah.
So what it will naturally do is that it will go through the stages of grief, and although they're not linear, they tend to follow sequence. So they'll go through the shock. I can't believe it happened. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. They'll go through that denial and that bargaining too. You know,
Yeah.
if they would have lived, I would have been able to spend more time with them. If God would have saved them, I would have known that God exists. Whatever that bargaining looks like for them. Then they will go into the anger. And the anger is one of those elements that I would like to make a small emphasis on because it has a big impact. We as culture have come to understand or normalize that sadness is an accepted emotion in grief, but anger is not. And I'll give you an example. You can be in a funeral home, or you can be in the process where you're getting ready to go through that grieving journey, right? You already anticipate it, whether it be through death or whether it be through divorce or something else. When somebody is sad, we tend to approach, right? We
Yeah.
tend to approach and we tend to say the things that we think are important to say. When somebody is angry, we tend to push them out. You know what? Just get out of here. Nobody has time for this right now. And we literally push that person out. But both of them are in the same space. One is just internalized, which is a sadness, and the other one is externalized, which is the anger. That's why I do not believe that there's anything that's anger management, because it's not about managing the anger. It's about understanding that the anger is protecting me from being seen as weak, which in our cultures, many times a man needs to be strong.
Yes.
He cannot be weak. He cannot cry. He cannot show emotion. So typically, that's where we see that males are often more in the anger space.
Yes.
But that means that they're hurting too. So that's one of those things where when a client comes and says, you know, it's because my husband, he was so mad, he didn't even care. No, it's the fact that he was angry and he was showing that he cared through the anger. And I'm not saying enabling it. What I am saying is understand that they're both hurting.
Yes.
And it's not our job to isolate one or the other.
Wow. So then, I mean, yes, like you said, you're not enabling that, you know, that anger should be shown,
That behavior, yeah.
or that behavior be normalized. What is I mean, for men who have to go through some of these things, because I know that, like you said, in this culture there is a lot of men don't cry,
Yeah.
men have to be strong, and in my culture it's the same thing.
Okay.
And so then, is there a right way for men to start being able to tap into certain emotion to be able to properly experience grief? Or even, is there a right way or a good way for them to show that grief, if it's not anger?
Okay, so and let me just go back and close the cycle up with anger, then it's sadness.
Yeah.
And sadness tends to be the most prolonged of all the stages, right? We tend to stay stuck in the sadness. And then slowly acceptance and a new way of seeing life comes, right? So going back to anger, and as a matter of fact, 50% of all marriages where there's a loss of a child, they don't make it because typically this is what tends to happen. I'm not saying in all cases, but this is very typical. So the wife may be hurting, right? She's expressing her sadness and she wants to be held. She wants to be loved. She wants to be protected in that space. She wants for somebody to witness and validate that that pain has a reason. The spouse, the husband, typically does not show the emotion because they don't know how to lean into the emotion with the wife. But what they will often do is that they start to do something that they didn't do before. So they'll start to pick up around the house, wash the dishes, put the clothes to wash. Things like that, that oftentimes makes the wife think you don't care. You're keeping yourself busy. You don't care about my pain. And that's when disconnection between them starts to happen. So oftentimes what I see is that the husband then feels like, well, anyways, no matter what I do, it's just not good enough for her.
Yep.
So that's when they will start to either go into, drinking alcohol, pornography, I mean, you name it. Anything that's going to help them to escape from the fact that not only have I gone through the grief, but now I also lost my wife because she no longer has that same space with me. So that's actually something that, unfortunately, in my own story, we did go through that process of divorce, my husband and myself, because I didn't understand that what he was doing was his way to show me that he was hurting. I didn't understand that him being outside drinking was his way of protecting himself. That was his way of trying to meet me where I was, but at the same time, not having anybody to listen to him.
Yeah.
So what did I do? You don't care. And I disconnected myself emotionally because anyways, I had already lost so much, right?
Yeah.
And in that space, one of my biggest goals when working with the couples is helping them to understand you are both equally hurting. You're just showing it in a very different way. And when they're able to see that, then at that point, they can embrace it and they can receive it for what it is, right? So going back to the man, when I see a client that comes in with so much anger, what I have learned is to not focus on the anger. Because the anger is simply the mask that they are showing me to protect themselves, right?
Yeah.
So what I do is I go below it and I ask them, what about this hurts you so much? And when I tap into the hurt, that's where typically, and I tell my clients, we're all nuts. Some of us are peanuts and we're really easy to crack, and others are walnuts and those suckers are tough to open, right? The anger often is that space where, man, it's difficult to crack because we're so focused on the emotion of anger. But if we simply do a very simple thing, if you see that your loved one is in a process of anger, rather than shaming them, you shouldn't be angry, you shouldn't be this, telling them everything that they shouldn't be, it's simply, what about this hurts you so much, right? How can the pain be minimized in this space? Is there anything that I can do to meet you there? One of the tricks that I do, and if there's anybody out there that is working with clients that are grief-oriented or trauma-oriented, in the very first session, I ask them for their first homework assignment. And that is, bring me a song that through the lyrics, I can understand what it feels like to be you. Because I would be a liar to sit there and to say, I understand how you feel.
Yeah.
They're going to look at me and they're going to think like you're full of shit because you don't.
Yep.
But if I listen to a song, and I've had clients bring me so many painful songs, Metallica, I mean, you name it, NF, you name it. Through the song, I can hear everything that is unspoken on behalf of the client. So for a client that is in a space of anger, if I ask them for a song, oftentimes they're going to bring me one that takes me right back to the root of pain. And in that space, I can hold that space while guiding them through the process so that they too, just like the lyrics of that song, can get themselves to go through the process. Then what I do a couple of months after is, okay, what song would describe you now? And it's so beautiful to see how the melody of that song changes, the lyrics of that song change.
Wow.
So much change because they allowed themselves to go through the process.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I asked initially about success, I think that kind of describes a little bit of what that feels
That
like.
transformation.
That transformation. And that's such a smart way to really, really tap into how they're feeling. Because you're right, there's a lot of people that you talk to and they're like, I know exactly how you feel. I'm like, bro, like you don't.
You don't.
You don't understand it, because what I'm going through is completely distinct from maybe what you think you've gone through. And so, like, yes, everyone's experiences are different and everything. But I guess a question for you that I have is, how do you, after being at work and dealing with everyone's grief and trauma of, them coming to you for support or help, how do you cope after that? Because I can imagine it being pretty draining. How do you cope after that?
That is actually a really good question. And as a therapist, I have seen my own healing through what I do differently in my coping. So I'll give you an example. Initially, I would finish with sessions. I would go home and I'd watch Criminal Minds or Dexter or something that was really, really full blown, right?
Yeah.
Because my mind needed to keep itself distracted too.
Yes.
I had not yet reached a place of healing. Now I go home, I turn on my candles, I do some meditation, I'm in stillness, I listen to the birds, like literally.
Yeah.
People think I'm crazy because I'll go outside and I'll see the squirrel and I'm just there looking like grounded. I take off my shoes, ground myself into earth. And it's a really beautiful space to be in when you don't have a need to run away. So that has been really interesting in my own journey, because now Criminal Minds stresses the heck out of me and I'll have nightmares. And I look at myself and I'm like, who's that? Like, who was that girl? And now I'm like, you know what, Roxanne? You can actually practice what you preach.
Wow.
Right? I've had clients that tell me, your life must be perfect.
Right.
And I'm like, far from it. I've just done the work on a daily basis where I'm actually satisfied with the quality of life that I have.
Yeah. Wow. I mean,
look at what your body just did. It's like a valve, the water when we open it up and it's like pressure, and then
it all just like comes out, honestly.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like it's even for me, this is something that I really am valuing, and I hope other people can feel it, because it just helps, personally understand how to deal with some of these, situations. And I guess I'll kind of dive into something, because I personally never grew up, I never saw a therapist ever in my life.
Okay.
If I'm being honest with you, I've only seen a therapist once, and that was like Better Health.
Okay.
Virtually. And, had a conversation for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and that was it. Never, once in my life.
Okay.
How important is just mental health and like just getting ahead of it? Because there's a lot of times where a lot of people don't classify it as, something that they need to care about. But I know that it's a very important aspect of what we do in our lives, because of how, we're going back and forth, go, we are in this community. How important is mental health, and why should we care so much about it?
What a packed question. How important is mental health? Just as important as physical health. As a matter of fact, the brain is what drives the body. And if we do not have the capacity to address anything that's going on in our brain, and yet we somehow think that our body is going to be working at full capacity, that's the biggest lie we tell ourselves. We often, as a matter of fact, are guided towards a therapist because we go to our medical provider and our blood pressure is through the roof, right? Or something is going on physically. You know, I tell my clients, if you're struggling with constipation, oftentimes you're holding on to something emotionally, so your gut is going to try to process and digest something that doesn't belong to the gut.
Yeah.
So all gastric problems start from there. And then I have other clients that tell me, like, man, I always have diarrhea, and it's because they have this thought of, I don't give a shit. So their body literally just runs things through because they cannot process the emotion. So, you know, people who, if you see people who have arthritis is often linked to unforgiveness. So what do the joints start to do? They start to cripple because you've been holding on to something from the past for so long that your body keeps the score, as Dr. Bessel van der Kolk says, and you think it's something that's organic, and it's not. A lot of cancers in the stomach, they come from a space of bitterness, resentment. So it's so important to pay attention to what is your body speaking to you.
Yeah.
Because the way that your body is speaking it directly correlates to what you're not processing. The shoulders and the back, people that tend to have a lot of back problems, they literally have felt the weight of maybe their whole family on their shoulders, and the back can only carry so long, so it will give out, right?
Yeah.
People that have problems with their knees and their joints, oftentimes they've been praying for the same thing over and over and over and over and over, and nothing has changed. Maybe it's an abusive relationship, whatever that may be, and they've been on their knees for so long that the knees start to carry the weight of it. So no matter how you see it, the body's gonna reflect what in your mind you're not wanting to process, right? So how important is mental health? The condition of your life depends on the condition of your thoughts.
Wow.
And if your thoughts are thoughts where you are your biggest enemy, you don't need anybody to put you down anymore. You don't need anybody to tell you that you're useless, that you're this, or you're not good enough. You do that for yourself day in and day out. Then tell me, what personality will that create for you? Because if your personal reality is your personality, then what person are you going to become when your personal reality is one that is often tied to the pain, the grief, right?
Yeah.
What quality of life is that going to give you?
Yeah.
And the problem and the danger here is that we become so conditioned to normalizing what we no longer want. We'll say it all day in and day out. I don't want this. I don't want to be in this relationship. I don't want to feel this way. And yet everything we don't want, we attract.
Yep.
So how important is it? Literally, the quality of your life depends on it. And not only the quality of your life, it's the quality of the generations that you're bringing forward too. The client that's in front of me, I'll tell them, you're here because your parents weren't. Right?
Yeah.
Reminds me of that meatloaf story. Have you heard it?
No.
Okay, so there's a meatloaf story. It's 3 generations, a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter. The daughter gets married, and she makes meatloaf for her husband. She makes the meatloaf, cuts off the ends, and her husband looks at her like, what are you doing? Why are you cutting off the ends? She goes, I don't know. Mom always did it. Oh. Well, why did Mom always do it? I don't know. I never asked. Well, ask. She calls Mom. Mom's like, I don't know. Grandma always did it. So they ask Grandma, and she looks at them like, what are you all talking about? My pan wasn't big enough. Right?
Yeah.
So here you have 2 other generations doing the exact same thing simply because nobody ever questioned, is this still valid and is it still needed? That's where a lot of times we find that transgenerational grief and trauma, where depending on what we saw, we become conditioned to normalize it, and we continue to live it out, but we never asked ourselves, how is it necessary for that person, but it's no longer necessary for me?
Wow.
That's the importance of mental health.
Wow. 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 Like, I wanna keep going. And like I was saying earlier, I always feel like this is the reason why I feel like everyone who comes on here is a genius, because I always feel like there needs to be a part two.
Well, like attracts like, right?
I agree. 100%. And so this is so transformational. And I think mostly for me, I'm sorry, but I have to make this about myself. I think mostly for me, it's transformational, 100%. And the reason why I even felt it in the first place is when I heard you speak during the TEDx, it just did something for me. And it just changed a way of thinking of, am I even doing this the right way? And it's, I think, like you said, questioning. Like, I started to question. I grew up in Ghana, West Africa, where, men don't cry. They tell you, be a man, pick it up.
Suck it up.
Suck it up, yeah. And starting to question a lot of these things. Unfortunately, I don't know. I still don't know if I can cry, but at some point, it's still something that it needs to be tackled or needs to be talked about, and so I really, really appreciate you sharing with me. I guess I have a final question for you.
Go for it.
For someone or anybody experiencing grief at any point in their life, what can you tell them, or what do you think they need to do or any piece of advice in order to help start their journey towards healing?
What can you do? I think that extending compassion towards yourself and knowing that you've done the best you could with what you knew. But at some point, it stops working. Everything that has served as a Band-Aid, the busyness, the distractedness, the medication, the alcohol, the pornography, the shopping, whatever that may be, your Band-Aid at some point stops working, and that's your sign to do something different for yourself. And if you can extend to yourself the same level of kindness and compassion that you do to others, then your life begins to change. When you have the capacity to literally do for you what you preach to others, because even to our worst enemy, we won't tell them, I hope you stay stuck in the same place for years.
Yep.
But yet we somehow live that out. If you have gotten to the point of being sick and tired with the life you're living, and you're ready to say, okay, what now? Just that one little question is going to propel you forward. If you have in any doubt, in your mind, any doubt of what the fear is of moving forward, why am I stuck? I have an exercise that I'd love to share for people. The subconscious mind and the conscious mind are two that don't communicate at the same time. It's like a light. It's on or off, right? The conscious mind is the one that acts. The subconscious mind is the one that knows why we do what we do. But we don't tap into subconsciousness unless we have a specific tool to be able to extract. So if there's a question that you have, why does this still hurt me? Why can't I get over it? Whatever it may be, and let me tell you, you're not going to get over it. You're going to get through it. But the task here is to do some what we call non-dominant handwriting. So you ask yourself a question using your dominant hand, because that's your consciousness. Consciousness is dominant hand. So let's just say your thought is, why do I keep doing the same thing over and over? Something very simple that a lot of people ask, including myself. So you ask it with your dominant hand. Then you respond to it with your non-dominant hand. That's your subconscious brain. This is one of those few moments where there's bilateral stimulation of the brain, and you can actually tap to both sides at the same time and have a conversation with your wiser self. Your wiser self is always trying to guide you the right direction. Oftentimes, we don't trust the wise self. We'd rather trust the external world. Hey, do you think I should? Should I go see a therapist? But we don't trust ourselves enough to say, you know what, this is something that I need for myself. So if you can begin there, maybe seeing a therapist is your fear. Why am I afraid of seeing a therapist?
Yeah.
And then you go in there and you answer. Then what I encourage is give yourself a couple of seconds, take a deep breath in and out so you can get back to frontal lobe. Then at that point, you read what you wrote. Even if you think it's not going to make sense, it makes sense. The subconsciousness knows what it wrote. So you read it, and if from there there's another question, like let's just say, where the hell did that come from? You ask with your dominant hand, and you allow your non-dominant to respond. That's going to be one of the most interesting conversations that you're going to have with a part of you that is telling you and guiding you into what healing is going to look like for you. Not everybody needs a therapist, but everybody needs a safe and healthy outlet, whatever that outlet may be for them.
Wow. Okay, this is the first thing I'm gonna do when I get home. Just test it out. It's a really, and thank you so much for sharing such a practical way of dealing with any sort of grief or any trauma or anything. I think I've never heard of such a practical way to do it. So I appreciate you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And, I'm going to do it. I'll do it. And then kind of share the results with you. I don't know if I'll do it right, but I guess if I have any questions, I'll make sure to
Remember, there's
reach
no
out.
right. There's what's right for you. So long as you're letting those two communicate, just continue to expand on
I
it.
like that.
Okay.
Wow. Well, Roxanne, thank you so much for being on here. Again, I'm definitely going to have you back on here because I feel like there's so much more that I want to know, that I want to ask. And hopefully anyone who has any questions can kind of just put it in the comments. And hopefully we can have Roxanne, if she's down, to come again on the second episode.
Count me in.
Kind of have you on here and ask, a lot more questions. But thank you so much. Where can, people find you if they need some help?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Facebook or Instagram at the Healing Center, and it's CENTRE.
Yes.
So once again, Facebook or Instagram on the Healing Center. I'm on LinkedIn, and my website is available, thehealingcenterrgv.com.
Beautiful. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe. And Roxanne, again, thank you so much. God bless you for being on here. And I'm looking forward to any feedback from this and how it goes. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.